Okay, dear students. So today we are discussing the a very brief introduction about a group of poets who lived in the 16th century, and they are known by the name metaphysical poets. Okay. So actually we have to learn a poem, The Canonization by John Donne. But before learning about John Donne and before delving into the poem, we need to see the context, the category of poets called metaphysical poets and the features of metaphysical poetry, so as to have a better understanding of the poem canonization that you have to learn. So this is the intention of this session, and this session is about a brief introduction to metaphysical poetry. So you can see my screen, and I'll you can all write the points down in your notebook. I will share this PPT on our Google Classroom as well later. So there is this category of poets who lived in the 16th, 17th century, and they're called metaphysical poets. Okay, so actually, this term was coined by the famous writer and critic called Dr. Samuel Johnson. But Samuel Johnson termed this group of writers as metaphysical poets only after a century. Okay, these group of poets lived in the beginning or the first half of the 17th century. But Dr. Samuel Johnson belongs to the 18th century, right? He came a century later. He lived a century later. Dr. Samuel Johnson was a scholarly person. He is, in fact, the person behind the English dictionary. Okay, so he was a very learned person, and in his scholarship, out of his literary output, there is one peculiarly important work that Dr. Samuel Johnson has written, and that is, as you can see on the screen, Lives of the English Poets. Okay, so Dr. Samuel Johnson has written a collection about the biography of several English poets before him. Okay, the predecessors before Samuel Johnson, their biographical details and the analysis of their poetry are all included in Dr. Samuel Johnson's collection called Lives. It is actually known by the single term Lives. Okay, Lives of the prominent English poets is the name of the whole work, but it is also known by the name Lives. Okay, so Dr. Samuel Johnson refers to the group of writers who lived in the 16th century or 17th century, the first half of the 17th century. And in Dr. Samuel Johnson's book, he refers to these group of writers by the term metaphysical poets. Okay, so the particular poets like John Donne or Andrew Marvell, all these poets, when they were writing the poetry, they were not known by that name. That name was given only after a century later to refer to this group of writers, and that name was given by Dr. Samuel Johnson a century later. So I hope you've understood that the story behind the term called metaphysical poets. Metaphysical poets, that term was given to refer to a group of writers, and that term was coined by the famous writer and critic and scholar Dr. Samuel Johnson almost a century later in the 18th century in his work called Lives, where he refers to the writers from the previous generations. Okay, so that is one thing about metaphysical poets. Okay, the term came from Dr. Samuel Johnson. Then you are already familiar with another name, another writer's name from the 17th century latter half, and that is John Dryden. John Dryden once, when referring to the poet called John Donne, he mentioned a comment. John Dryden, the famous poet and dramatist John Dryden, once referred to a particular poet called John Donne, saying that John Donne affects the metaphysics. Okay, so there is the comment from John Dryden regarding John Donne that John Donne affects the metaphysics. So if you combine these two writers, the comments of these two writers, Dr. Samuel Johnson's comment and John Dryden's comment, if you combine both of this together, you can get the story behind the term metaphysical poetry. So metaphysical poetry or metaphysical poets, that term is used to refer to a group of writers who lived in the first half of the 17th century. And two references can be made. One is to Dr. Samuel Johnson and to John Dryden. Okay. Now, in the Lives, in that work called The Lives, Dr. Johnson speaks about the metaphysical poets. He shares his opinion. Okay, he says that actually it's a very negative commentary done by Dr. Johnson, but anyway, we'll just see the points. He says that the metaphysical poets, this group of poets, they were men of learning, and all that they did in their poetry was to show off their learning, and that was the only endeavor that they did. Dr. Johnson actually criticizes the group of writers whom he calls metaphysical poets, like John Donne, Andrew Marvell, and all that. They were men of learning, but Dr. Johnson says that the only endeavor that these group of poets wrote poetry was just to show off their learning, because these poems are all highly intellectual, rationalized. And so Dr. Johnson says that they wrote in verse instead of poetry. If you look for poem, if you look for that, what you say in Malayalam, kavyatmagada, if you look for poetry in that poem, you may miss it. You can just see the verse. So that is Dr. Johnson's critical opinion. You forget that. Now, the next thing that I have highlighted, the next point that I have highlighted, you can see that, right? The most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. This is a very, very popular statement about the metaphysical poets from Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson, this statement that the metaphysical poets use the most heterogeneous ideas yoked by violence together. This is a very famous statement. Try to learn it. If you can, try to learn it by heart. This particular statement that I have included in red color in the bullet. The most heterogeneous ideas. What is heterogeneous? Something that does not match with each other, right? If you take red color, and then if you take black color, they don't go together, right? Maybe the red color will go well with the rose color or pink color, but red and black, no, they don't go together. They are from a different side of the spectrum, right? So most heterogeneous ideas, you can compare one idea with another, but there has to be some matching. Okay, the famous simile that we use, we quote in every poetry class to use, the simile or the metaphor. We compare the love to a red rose. Okay, you can compare that because you're comparing love to a red rose. Rose is the queen of flowers. Rose is a very beautiful flower. It is so tender and it is so beautiful and it has a wonderful fragrance. So there is no problem if you compare rose and a love, your lady love. It is okay. It has a matching because you are actually saying that your lady love is your queen. She is so soft. She is so tender and she has a wonderful personality. That is what you mean, right? So it has a matching. It is it can go well with each other, right? The both ideas of comparing, one is the rose and the other is love. Okay, you can do that. But think about comparing your love with a pair of compass. You all have learned geometry. You all have done, geometrical arrangements in your mathematics classes in your 8th, 10th, 12th, etc. using a compass, a protractor, compass, your geometry box. You remember that? What is the specialty of a compass? Compass is a pair of needles, right? They are together, right? They are joined to a particular point and they are together. And actually, what is the specialty of compass? If you want to draw a circle in the geometry class, when you want to draw a circle, you place one end of the compass at the center, where you want to be the center of the circle. You press the compass there. So one needle is fixed there, and then you rotate the other end around it, right? So this is how a compass works. How can you compare a love to a compass? It's so absurd. It is a geometrical tool. It is used in maths. It is used to draw. It is used for architectural purposes and all. How can you compare love to a compass? So it is a sort of a heterogeneous idea. You wonder, I can't understand what is it? How can the poet could have used the simile of a rose, or the simile of a garden, or something, or something else, or maybe a bird or something like that, a swan. But why a compass? So it seems to be a heterogeneous idea. And you can see that somehow the poet is forcing to unite the two ideas. It is very easy to unite the love with the red rose. It is very easy to match both of this. But here the poet is actually trying so hard. It is said to be violence here. He is using so much of violence and so much of force to combine the two heterogeneous ideas. Okay, so this is what happens in metaphysical poetry. Metaphysical poets often use certain images, certain similes, certain metaphors, which may not fit your imagination on a first look. You may feel like there is no matching between the idea conveyed and the metaphor used. So such is one specialty of the metaphysical poets. So Dr. Johnson says that they yoke the most heterogeneous ideas by violence together. So most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together in the metaphysical poems. Okay. Then there is one important term that you have to remember, and that is metaphysical conceits. Okay, this example that I told you, a pair of compass compared to a lover, that is a metaphysical conceit. So you can see that the metaphysical poets use plenty of metaphysical conceits in their poems. For example, the example that I just told you, that lovers being compared to a pair of compass. What is the problem there? It is a far-fetched image. It is a heterogeneous image, lovers and a pair of compass. There is an irony. You can see that in the screen itself. There is an irony. You are saying it as a pair of compass, but you know that it is one. It is a single thing. So that is one irony. But if you look at the idea of comparing the lovers to a compass, you can see a logic. You can see, you have to think, like you think for science classes. You have to think and you get the logic. What is the logic of comparing lovers to a pair of compass? Okay, one end of the compass, or one needle of the compass, is one lover, and the other lover is rotating himself around the other, who is on the center. Suppose if I compare me and my partner as a pair of compass, okay, my partner may be at the center, that fixed compass needle. That is, if I compare my partner to be that, I am actually, the whole of my life is centered on him. Whatever I do, wherever I go, my thoughts are aligned towards him, right? So this is the idea behind the pair of compass. See, a lot of intellect has been involved in this particular image. It's a very logical and brilliant idea, right? But usually we in postmodern poems and all, if you learn postmodern poems and all, you can see much more far-fetched images. But metaphysical conceits came as a very brand new experiment to poetry, particularly if you take the context of the Elizabethan and the Restoration poetry, where poems used similes and metaphors, but not like this, not too much intellectual images like this. So this came as an experiment. This came like a brand new technique or technology of expressing a simile or a metaphor. So these are called metaphysical conceits. You can see the presence of a metaphysical conceit in metaphysical poetry. So what are metaphysical conceits? They are far-fetched images, unusual similes and unusual metaphors. They are unusual. You need to think twice or thrice to find the meaning of the metaphysical conceit. And I told you already the example of lovers compared to a pair of compass. Now, there are some features for the metaphysical poetry you can see on the screen. Definitely, there'll be the use of metaphysical conceits. Metaphysical poems will certainly have somewhere or the other, some metaphysical conceits. Then this also we have already discussed, they are highly intellectual. You need to brainstorm for ideas, you need to think and read again and again to find the deeper meanings. Like for example, if you read the Shakespearean sonnet that you have learned in the previous class, there is nothing much, it's very easy to understand it, right? Or the Spenserian sonnet that you have learned before that, even that is easy to be understood, you get the idea, right? But this one you need to read once or twice or thrice to get the deeper layers of meaning. So they're highly intellectual. And also the poet plays with words. Pun, P-U-N. Pun is an important term when we look at poetry, analysis of poetry, study of poetry, because pun is a word play. The poet may use a word in one context and it may mean another. For example, I'll say the term crown. The term crown, it usually means kiridam. Crown can also mean the top part of your head. In the nursery rhyme, Jack and Jill went up the hill. Jack fell down and broke his crown. Netti പൊട്ടുക. നെറ്റിക്ക് crown എന്ന് പറയാം. And also, if you look at an egg shell, the shell of an egg, the crown of the egg. Okay, so the poet may use the term crown and he may mean any of these. Actually, the example that I just told you is from Shakespeare's King Lear. In Shakespeare's King Lear, there is a reference to the word crown. And the crown there has three meanings. The two shells of the egg as two crowns of the egg with the meat in between. Or it can refer to the real golden regal crown on the head of the king. Or it can also mean the part of the head. The what we say tirunetti and all that, right? The part of the upper part of the head, that is also the crown. So you can see there's a word play. Shakespeare was so wonderfully, he was an excellent player of words. If you look at the plays of Shakespeare, you can see pun involved, employed in so many cases. Anyway, so that is pun. Pun or word play is certainly present in metaphysical poets. Also, there'll be paradoxes. You can see that the poet means something and the poet looks to be saying something else. For example, the poem that we have to learn, canonization, the term canonization is a religious ceremony where you anoint people as saints. വിശുദ്ധരാക്കുന്ന ആ ഒരു പ്രക്രിയയാണ് canonization എന്ന് പറയുക. But here the poem actually means canonization in a secular context. It does not mean canonization in the religious context, but in a secular context. So such kinds of paradoxes are abundant in metaphysical poems. Then I've already told you that metaphysical conceits are certainly there. Then they are rationalistic. The themes in metaphysical poems are all rationalistic. They are questioning the existence of human beings. They question the existence of God. And also they question the traditional ideas of love. Usually we say that love is something that is spiritual, something that is mental, something that is physical. And usually we say that you love your love is better. The ideal form of love is the spiritual love, or the love of the hearts rather than the love of the body. The carnal pleasures, the lust and the sexual pleasures are not actually considered in the case of an ideal love, right? In ideal love, we don't look for the appearances. We don't look for lustful desires, sexual desires. That was the earlier concept, right? So here, metaphysical poems question the rules and regulations regarding how should you love another person. Should you restrict yourself only to a spiritual love or to the ideal love, or can you have the scope of carnal love? Can you have the possibility of sexual love? So such questioning the traditional value system, morality, what is good and what is bad, all these sorts of themes are abundant in metaphysical poems. So these are the different features. These are just a few features of metaphysical poetry. And finally, I'll list out the names of a few metaphysical poets who are the famous or important poets who represent the metaphysical category. John Donne, as we have already seen, John Donne, Dryden referred to John Donne as a person affecting the metaphysics. So John Donne is one prominent figure from the metaphysical poetry. Then Andrew Marvell, George Herbert, Abraham Cowley, Richard Crashaw, Henry Vaughan, Vaughan, pronounced as Vaughan, right? So all these are the famous metaphysical poets. And out of these, you have to learn the poem by John Donne. So this is all about metaphysical poetry. So in order to understand a poem written by any of these poets, you need to have an idea about who are metaphysical poets, what is metaphysical poetry, and all that. So I hope the idea is clear to you. If you have any doubts, if you want any repetition, you may please respond in the chat box.